So thank you so much for being here. At least, as we approach some of the holiday breaks, I thought that this would be a really great opportunity to kind of, talk about loneliness, because I feel like it's already prevalent for people 365, but I feel like it's experienced even more as the holidays approach, because we all have different relationships with family. And I say that loosely based on, blood and chosen in our experiences. So this was a great opportunity to have LaQuarion here to talk about loneliness, one for our own understanding and developing our own resources and tools or ways that we can approach it when we recognize it, but also how listeners and people in the HearMe space can continue to support members when this is being experienced through our chat space. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you. And so you can go ahead and present. I'm going to drop off camera and do your thing.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm LaQuarion Bradley. And so I'm going to be talking about loneliness. And I hope that the main goal of getting us on the same page as far as understanding loneliness and what that means to us as well as others, I hope that we're able to just come together and learn more on how we can be more supportive towards the people that we're serving, pretty much. Okay, so let me figure out how to do this. Sorry, guys. I don't know how to share this or put it in. Okay, I don't know how to make it to where it's full screen. Sorry, bear with me. So loneliness. I'm going to be talking about loneliness as it's a topic that everyone kind of goes through at different stages in their life. And so we're going to start with what is loneliness. We're going to go through the signs of loneliness, discuss our experiences with the topic. There are different types of loneliness and the differences between loneliness and solitude and how we can cope with those changes and provide support to people that are experiencing those things. So what is loneliness? Generally, it's a feeling of the lack of companionship. It can be an unpleasant emotional response to feeling like you're isolated and not around a lot of people, in a position where you're desiring to have human contact or just contact with anything else, whether that be an animal or just anything, and the perception of one's social needs not being met. And so those are the general definitions that I've come across as to what loneliness might mean to different people. So what happens when we feel lonely? A lot of the times it's equivalent to being unable to connect with others on an intimate level, feeling overwhelmed about those thoughts that you're not having the social support or not around humans enough, or having like a decrease in human contact. Feeling negative feelings of self-worth and having the negative self-talk. A lot of the times having low self-esteem can impact those feelings of loneliness. Also feeling exhausted and burnt out when you're trying to engage in social interactions can stem from feeling lonely. So a discussion that I wanted to have, and I'm gonna open it up for us to talk about, is, have you ever experienced loneliness, and how did that present itself in your life, and what were some of the ways that you were able to overcome loneliness? If anybody wants to share.
I can share. So I moved to Japan about a year ago. It was my first time away from all my families and friends. I'm really close to my family. I've had the same friends since like the 6th grade. So although I had my husband, I still felt a sense of loneliness because I didn't have those other connections near me. And I overcame that by volunteering, joining different clubs and groups to meet friends.
That's good. That's a good way to combat loneliness for sure. Anybody else have experiences with loneliness and how it was something that was presented in your life in ways that you overcame? I know personally, a lot of the times when I'm feeling overwhelmed and I have a lot going on, I tend to isolate, especially when I'm dealing with anxiety and depression. It all kind of just wraps together into one for me. And I tend to have those feelings of loneliness because I'm like, I'm the only one going through all this. I'm the only one that's here for me because I have to do all this stuff by myself. And then it's just kind of one of those things where I just go downhill. But I try not to think that way. And I tend to catch on to when I'm feeling overwhelmed and try to do things to relax and baby step it out so that I'm not going down that spiral personally. Anybody else want to share? We can't hear you, BJ.
I'm always trying to mute. I would say, in the interest of contributing and being vulnerable, I feel like loneliness is not a thing I actually experience often. In fact, incredibly rarely, because I'm an only child. So I love to be by myself and alone. I'm like, why are people so needy and want to be around each other? Like, let's just, I'm my own make-believe best friend. However, growing up with that, in mind, I feel like I experienced loneliness after my mom passed away. Because she was really the only source or sense of family, or if I sought connection to some extent, like that was the person my brain always went to. And so I felt like my loneliness was very much connected to grief, because it then became very challenging to find people who could understand what I was going through. And so it created a different kind of isolation that I really wasn't prepared for. And if I'm being transparent, it's something that I'm still processing to date, especially when I observe different family dynamics and recognize that a lot of those experiences are so counter to my own. But I would say that that is where it comes up the most for me, is when I watch people with their families and knowing that my experience is significantly different.
Mm-hmm. And I know, like with the holidays coming up, things like that definitely have a major impact. And a lot of people do tend to feel very lonely during this time. Okay, so Lisa said loneliness can happen when someone is going through something that others around them aren't. And that is so true. I feel that way a lot of the times. Anybody else want to share? Thank you for sharing. Okay. So we're going to hop back into the PowerPoint. I figured out how to do it.
I was like, is that what you're trying to do? It might be underneath slideshow, but
I figured that out. I couldn't see it, so that was the issue.
got it.
Okay. Okay. So yes, thank you all for sharing and being vulnerable, because it can be tough sometimes to talk about this topic and, share some things that maybe we intimately don't really feel always comfortable to release to others. So I learned that there are types of loneliness. There's situational loneliness that stems from certain situations that trigger those, components related to isolating, related to having negative thoughts, or feeling that, or perceiving that you don't have any human contact. Also emotional loneliness, kind of what Lisa said in the chat, feeling like you're going through something that maybe others aren't going through, and you're feeling like you're not able to relate. And that's something that can lead to emotional loneliness, social loneliness, especially like during COVID. That was an example of social loneliness, because some people were accustomed to going to work, and that was their outlet, because we're at work like a lot more than we are at home when you actually, do the breakdown in math. And A lot of the times that's the only social life that we have. And chronic loneliness. A lot of the time, chronic loneliness leads into, mental illness, like, or mental health diagnoses related to like anxiety and depression. And usually that's marked by periods where it's longer than 2 weeks, and you have the sadness and all these other, different emotions or different things that come with it. So, yeah. Okay. Oh, I just did this. Situational is life changes that lead to isolation. And usually it gets better with adaptation. When things happen and you start to adapt to the new normal, then you're not feeling so lonely with it because you've learned how to kind of cope. Emotional is absence of closeness. And one of the things that you can do to combat that would be to create a village or create a community. A lot of the times when, especially with what someone shared earlier, you move to a place where you're not really accustomed to anything, everything is brand new, you kind of have to create a space for yourself to be able to be comfortable and not be so lonely and create connection for you. Social, lack of social contacts, physical separation from people. It's the same thing as emotional. Creating a village and a community for yourself would be a way to combat that. And chronic is when feelings of loneliness and isolation go on for an extended period of time. A way that we combat that would be through exercising, creating a community, finding a support group, getting some professional support such as counseling and therapy, and even case management in some cases. So loneliness can manifest in so many forms, such as being in a unique situation or place of mind that you don't see others show, but talking can help break the barrier. I agree with that. A lot of the times when we have the opportunity to talk with people and share kind of what we're going through, we don't feel as lonely, and there's a lot of people that go through things and we don't even know because we're not talking about it. So the more that we talk about it, the more that we're able to find out that it's actually a very common thing that a lot of people go through. And so I think it's definitely important to talk with others and create a community. Okay, so solitude versus loneliness. Solitude usually is associated with feeling pleasant with being alone. You're doing it on purpose. It's a choice. It's a positive state of mind. It results in inner peace. You usually correlate it to someone going to a beach by themselves and having tea and book in the morning, or coffee and a book in the morning, and they're by themselves and they're enjoying it. Usually they're doing it for enlightenment, but ultimately it's a choice. Loneliness, on the other hand, is when you're unhappy with being alone. You generally have a negative state of mind, and it does result in adverse health effects, and it's not always a choice, especially when it comes down to things like moving, or like, someone mentioned earlier, deaths in the family and things like that. It's a lot different from solitude in that respect. So we talked about some coping skills, but just going to reiterate it. Some coping skills to kind of handling loneliness would be to create a community, getting support from a professional through counseling or therapy, or even joining a support group. Adopting a furry friend has been something that I've talked to people and that has helped. Sometimes the cure to loneliness is to feel like you're responsible for a little person or a little animal, and that has been helpful. Developing a new hobby, and in that way you actually could meet other people, and then you may be able to create a community for yourself. Volunteering is a good way to do the same thing. Exercising, if you're joining a gym, they have different like groups where you can go and do like classes. That's a way to build community, and you never know, talking to them, they might be there doing the same thing that you're doing for the same reason. Finding a support groups and seeking ways to practice wellness. And wellness is just something or a group of things that allow you to be well. And that could include exercising. It could include changing your diet. It could include just generally developing new habits for yourself that equate to you being happier and healthier in an emotional, spiritual, mental, physical sense. Oh, and these are the references. I didn't think it would be that short, but yes, okay. So that's the presentation on loneliness. Does anybody have any questions? Questions, comments, or concerns?
There's something in the comments. Hello, everyone. Interested in how some of the chatters disclosing information on personality disorder. Oh, I found. Sorry, I was like trying to Rolodex what the words could be. How some of the chatters disclosing information on personality disorder usually say experiencing severe loneliness. It seems as well that untreated mental health might interfere in socializing with others and create loneliness. I think that's really a cool point.
Yeah, that's something I also found in personality disorder. It's one of the like antisocial is one of those characteristics, but also, yes, people that are dealing with some mental health things definitely experience loneliness. It's like I said, like with anxiety and depression, like it all just kind of intertwines and compounds. So thank you for that observation.
I think to that same point, I was really thinking about two things, both this comment and one that came up when you were talking about like the differences between solitude and loneliness. I think speaking to kind of the comment, what I find interesting is because HearMe is global, I feel like our experiences or our framework with mental health, even though they should be similar on some level across the board, that there seems to be a level of advocacy to make discussions around mental health more commonplace, where when we're dealing with some of our members who might, be based in some of the spaces abroad, that they're it's like they're coming from like almost like a more remedial perspective of like, I don't know about this, help me kind of figure out like what is going on. And we're starting to kind of provide language to, I think, some of what's being experienced, because it's just not common to, as I think Haranjit said, like no one actually thinks anyone else is experiencing it. And when you talk about it, there's a sense of culture that comes with it, that it doesn't become a part of common conversation or a statement and a question. Yeah.
Yeah, I've noticed that within the chats, I've noticed that a lot of people that are living abroad, they don't talk about these things. And so having the space and the opportunity to talk about it, and then being able to connect with someone that is like actually has experiencing that, and they're like, oh, you understand where I'm coming from, because I'm scared to talk to anyone else about it, but I'm glad that someone understands where I'm coming from. I think it's important, and I'm glad that we have that for people. And the suggestions, Sulika, I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing it incorrectly. What suggestions or approach do you recommend to utilize with chatters that are experiencing loneliness? Some of those coping skills that I mentioned, I think would be good to suggest, like exercising, talking with someone, creating a new hobby. All of those are ways for people to kind of combat the emotional aspect, the mental aspect of loneliness, and in other ways, physical aspect. And so just creating, different things to do, or creating new habits and encouraging people to do things differently, I think will be a good start to kind of combating those symptoms of loneliness. You're welcome.
I agree. And before I ask this question, Haranjit, I just want to say, so based on your message, it looks like you're still trying to utilize the old app. It may still be on your phone, but that app is no longer in use. We, as HearMe, have created a new app. So that is probably why you're receiving the no network error message, because the app technically no longer exists and is functional. You would need to download the new HearMe app, which looks a little bit more in terms of visual, like the new updated logo that's currently on my screen. And you'll see the similar color profile in your app store or Google Play Store. So hopefully that'll resolve that issue for you. The question I actually had, you're very welcome, centered empaths, because I feel like a lot of people enter this space kind of being empaths, right? And like take on a lot of stuff. And so thinking about, or if you can speak to like the need for, I'm trying to say, experiencing loneliness, right? But needing to focus on solitude as like a self-care measure. If you can speak to that both on a either professional or personal level, or it's just pontificating or spitting out loud. I was really curious about that.
I know for me, I work in the mental health field, and a lot of the times I need solitude. I personally use that. I meditate, or I just sit in silence, and I do it on purpose. And some weekends I don't go anywhere, do anything. I just want to sit there and not be bothered. And it's a choice, as opposed to feeling overwhelmed and anxious about everything that I have going on, and then being depressed about the fact that I feel like I'm the only one that's doing all these things. Like, it's definitely a big difference for me. But I don't know if that answers it, but yeah.
It does a little bit. I mean, it sounds like, still recognizing like I'm an empath, right? That I actually carve out that time to recharge myself. And that part of my self-care measure is not making myself feel bad, because while I might be experiencing some sort of loneliness, I know in order for me to do what I need to do, I still have to be intentional about how I spend this time. So that answers it for me. Thank you. This is probably one of the fastest presentations we've ever had in the known world. And I love it now that all this is happening. Rick's here. But if no one else has any other questions, this is an okay place to stop. I hope that people find this beneficial. I hope that people, in that vein of making suggestions or offering suggestions, when people are expressing loneliness, that some of these tools are helpful, and also helping people kind of establish what kinds of loneliness perhaps that they're experiencing might also kind of tailor how we support them with what they're expressing. And Lisa, I'm not sure about your question. What should we respond? I'm not sure what that means. How should we respond when they feel isolated?
Well, I would suggest, well, firstly, hearing them out, because like we talked about earlier, emotional isolation, feeling like you're the only one going through some of the things that you're going through. I think it's definitely important to hold space for them and what they're feeling when they're expressing kind of what's going on and why they feel isolated, or why they feel lonely. After holding space for them, I would go back to making suggestions on things that they can do to try to improve those feelings, and just creating new habits, essentially, because a lot of the times we default into things that maybe aren't the most healthy coping skills. And so suggesting exercising, joining the gym, or talking to someone, talking to a close friend, just creating a space that would allow them to not be isolated, for them to not be able to feel lonely. And if they don't have friends, I would recommend support groups. There's, especially like on Facebook, I think Facebook is global, right? There's like a lot of spaces that are being created, especially post-COVID, that are what's not really advice, it's like suggestions, but Facebook has a lot of opportunity for support groups. And so making a suggestion to explore maybe support groups that are online or even in the area, suggesting just kind of those positive coping skills to try to get them to create friends even.
Yeah, I think that's a good launching point, because I realize, like, I just want to preface that anything we're saying is an offering, right? So once we, in short, are engaged in a conversation, it's no different than asking those open-ended questions as to, why do you feel that way? Like, what experience, like what brought this on, those kinds of things. And then, do you mind if I share with you what worked for me? Have you considered this? So there are all these things that we're really trying to do to unlock doors to help people see more possibility within their experience, than just telling them, get on Facebook, get on that meetup site, because those things may not work for them. We're also assuming a lot around their accessibility, and ability to access those things, especially safely, or assuming that all those things are available, sometimes when they may not be. So, I think that those are all great suggestions. And I know that Rick is here. But Rick, just to layer on, do you have any support information? Did he say something? Oh, okay. Is it just me? Or is Rick frozen? Oh, I was saying, do you have any?
Can you hear me?
I can now.
Okay.
We got the question, in centering, how should we respond, especially to members who express that they feel isolated, or like everyone hates them, or like they don't really have friends. So LaQuarion added some, suggestions. I tried to follow up, but is there anything else that hasn't been mentioned that might be useful for anyone present or who might view this later?
I think just validating that maybe they're feeling, and we're here for them, right? Like we may be their connection until some of their skills or their ability to meet other people or other doors open up. We can be that. I mean, that's one of the reasons we were created, was to take chats like this. I always explore interests. What are you interested in? It doesn't have to be a support group or but if you like to read and you go to the library, you might see somebody reading a book, or volunteering. If you can volunteer, sometimes you can make connections because you're volunteering for common interests, and other people will have common interests, and it's like a work friend. It's you have that opportunity to also practice skills. If you, sometimes people just feel awkward, like, I don't know how to talk to people. Well, I'm here to help. I'm here to help someone, but it's okay if I'm say things that are like, I don't have the best words all the time. It's okay. So that's the areas that I would probably try to focus on and take a look at, and see if they can name them too. That would help. What are your interests? What are the, any volunteer areas or things that you can volunteer at? When they start naming them out loud and you make a commitment, to call one or reach out to one, they're more likely to follow through with it.
I think that's great insight, Rick. And I just want to say, Lisa, I see your question. How do we segue into providing ideas again? I want to say that there is no absolute script, because people's situations are going to be different. But I feel like it's a combination of all these things. So if you combine, some of what Rick just shared with, tell me more about that. What are your interests, right? And then they can list off some things, and that the segue can be, have you tried this recently, or what are your feelings, if you haven't, and see where that conversation takes you. But I think that also just highlights the importance of open-ended questions, to help unlock those doors for people to find intrinsic solutions for themselves. So I hope that helps you. It may not be the exact answer that you want, but I think it's more or less just the asking people questions to see what they give you back versus the do this, do that, that will lead you in the direction that you're seeking. Cool.
Questions?
Yeah. Does anyone else have any questions, or you can get 30 minutes of your lives back if you blocked off an hour for this? Cool. Well, LaQuarion, thank you so much for taking the time to put this information together. I will say my key takeaway is thinking about the different kinds of loneliness that can be experienced versus just thinking them as one huge umbrella. You know, for what I shared, I immediately was like, oh, that was situational. Oh, that makes sense. Great. And so I think when I'm listening or supporting other people, that I can kind of enter it with that framework, and then also think about the kinds of things that support addressing that feeling through that lens. So thank you for that. I will go ahead and stop the recording. Once our marketing person comes back, we'll get this video out to everybody along with the presentation, but have an amazing day or evening wherever you are. And if you're doing things through this holiday season, enjoy, please be safe, and we will see you back soon. Thanks again. Bye, everybody.